Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: President-elect Trump detailing his plan for communication with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, plus what he said about rebuilding the U.S. Navy and the U.S. being ripped off by China. China's neighbors are closely monitoring an infectious disease spreading inside China. Human metapneumovirus patients are crowding some hospitals in the country. Taiwan suffers more undersea cable damage. Authorities blame a Chinese vessel that dragged its anchor across the seafloor in nearby waters. And Washington just approved the sale of up to 1,200 missiles to Japan, just weeks after giving Taiwan the green light to buy U.S. weapons. President-elect Trump saying he will be able to deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping once taking office, adding that China needs the U.S. badly because its economy is struggling.
In an interview with talk show host Hugh Hewitt, Trump said he had had a great relationship with Xi until COVID-19 broke out. Trump said he believes he and Xi will probably get along very well, but he said it has to be a two-way street, adding that China is ripping off the U.S. by $1 trillion a year. Trump also touched on the damage from the COVID-19 pandemic, which originated in Wuhan, China. He said the virus that came out of the Wuhan labs cost $60 trillion in worldwide damage and millions of lives, adding, quote, "It's a bridge too far." It's unclear if the virus that causes COVID-19 actually came from a lab in Wuhan called the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Trump also added that he and China's Xi have been talking through representatives. Trump noted he intends to rebuild the U.S. Navy. He said China is knocking out one ship every 4 days and that the U.S. has been sitting back and watching.
Zooming out, the U.S. and China are vying for dominance in a number of sectors. One of them is shipbuilding capacity, an area where the U.S. has seen a dramatic decline and lost its status as the world's biggest shipbuilder.
Today, the U.S. accounts for 0.1% of global shipbuilding, while Chinese shipyards, with nearly 20% of their operating costs subsidized by Beijing, accounts for 54%.
For every 359 large container ships China builds, we are building one. That is not a typo.
China operates the world's largest navy with 370 ships and submarines. The U.S. has fewer than 300 ships. China and its neighbors are on high alert over the spread of an infectious disease. Cases of human metapneumovirus, or HMPV, are on the rise. Some hospitals across China are overcrowded. HMPV symptoms are similar to those of COVID-19. Young children and seniors are more likely to develop serious symptoms with HMPV. According to Chinese authorities, there is no vaccine or specific treatments for the illness. Neighboring countries are closely monitoring the outbreak. Sean Lin, a former U.S. Army officer and microbiologist, noted that the outbreak data coming out of China is limited.
I think so far, the data from China is very fragmented. The government did mention this winter season, they see a huge spike of the HMPV. But exactly what are the cities or regions have a significantly jump versus other region that may be like routine or similar level at the last 2 years? We don't know the detail yet. And the neighboring country that you mentioned, I think they are playing very good strategy to be very cautious, to be very observative to see if anything unusual happening in China, because every country, learned the lessons from the pandemic, COVID pandemic. So everybody want to be, paying close attention to the public health situation inside China. But the data from China is still very limited. We haven't seen any major hospitals have a clear declaration, say they are facing an outbreak at the pandemic or at the endemic level, not even pandemic level, right? So we do see in China many of the big hospitals have a lot of children's going to see doctors, more hospitalizations, more respiratory infections need a secondary care. We see these kind of reports, but a lot of them is sporadic on the internet. So the problem is that the Chinese government didn't provide a systematic data for outside world to understand what's the real situation.
Cases of HMPV are also confirmed in Hong Kong, Malaysia, and India. The World Health Organization hasn't issued an announcement about the illness so far. But the Taiwanese CDC warned children and seniors should be cautious. Cambodia also issued a warning. Taiwanese authorities accused a Chinese ship of damaging an undersea cable connected to the island on Friday. The damaged cable is part of the subsea internet cable system connecting Taiwan with the west coast of the U.S. The cable's Taiwan operator said service was immediately restored after it decided to run data through other cables. Taiwanese authorities said they have asked the ship's next destination, South Korea, to help investigate the matter. The Chinese cargo ship is named Shunxing 39, according to satellite images and other maritime databases. The vessel's sailing route was very chaotic as it passed by Taiwan's north shore. Critical undersea cables are embedded in seabeds beneath those waters, including the one that suffered damage. That specific cable is part of the Trans-Pacific Express cable system, a piece of critical communications infrastructure. It connects the U.S. and Taiwan, as well as the east coast of China, Japan, and South Korea. Authorities say the location where the Chinese ship dragged its anchor coincided with the damage to the cable. According to the Financial Times, the ship is owned by a company registered in Hong Kong. It was allegedly directed by a person from mainland China, despite the ship flying the flag of Cameroon. The Taiwanese government said the incident was unlikely to be an innocent accident. The incident comes only 2 months after NATO countries accused China of sabotaging their undersea cables. The State Department gave Japan the go-ahead to purchase up to 1,200 missiles Thursday. According to the department, the sale could be worth over $3.6 billion. The package features advanced air-to-air missiles with medium-range capability. Defense supply experts see the deal as a potential first step for Japan, which could eventually lead the country to produce its own domestic weapons. Following the deal's approval, Secretary of State Antony Blinken Monday said North Korea fired a ballistic missile during his visit to South Korea. China responded to the missile test and said Beijing's stance towards the Korean peninsula remains unchanged. It comes as Washington ramps up support to the U.S. defense alliance in the Indo-Pacific in the face of threats posed by Communist China and its allies. Last month, the Defense Department also greenlit a potential arms sale to Taiwan that would be worth close to $300 million. The Pentagon designating a slew of Chinese entities as Chinese military companies Monday. That's including tech giant Tencent and battery maker CATL. The designation doesn't mean immediate bans for those companies in the U.S., though it is a blow to their reputation. It also signals to U.S. firms that working with them poses risks. What's more, the DoD also removed the designation from 6 Chinese companies. The reversal applies to AI firm Megvii Technology, China Railway Construction Corporation, China State Construction Group, and China Telecommunications Corporation, among others. This comes after China slapped export controls on Lockheed Martin, as well as Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security Division. NTD's Kevin Hogan spoke to Brian Reisinger about the economic impacts of these export controls. He's the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope, and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. Let's dive in.
Brian, thanks for joining us. These are very serious implications. This is Lockheed Martin, Raytheon missile technology companies that are having these export controls put on them. What could be the broader impacts of China's move?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on this morning. You know, the broader impacts are really yet to be seen, and this is a chain reaction that began years ago under President Trump's first administration, continued actually under the Biden administration, where they, to some degree, doubled down on what President Trump had done. And now this is the next step. The immediate impact of this depends upon which companies and which types of products China ultimately counts as part of these sanctions. But the bigger question, to your exact point, is how far is China willing to go as America undertakes these efforts to wipe out unfair trade standards?
So, Brian, some of these export controls involve these dual-use items such that they can be used for civilian and military purpose as well. Can you explain that and exactly how that's going to play out within the United States economy?
Absolutely. So dual use is a reference to something that could be used for civilian uses or for military uses. You could read that really narrowly, and you could read that really broadly. A really broad example would be tires, something like that could be used on a regular civilian vehicle, could be used on a military vehicle. If there's a really broad reading of that, the consequence of this could be much broader than it immediately seems, because the issue would be that, the expense of those items would be higher as a result of tariffs. That would have a much bigger impact on us here at home as a result of that. And so it's kind of one of those moments where the devil is in the details, and we have to see what exact definition would China apply to those kinds of goods.
And, how can the United States respond to China's actions here?
Yeah, well, China is doing a good amount of saber rattling, and we have to see how much real power is behind that based on the definition that they place on these dual use items. The broader issue that we need to be making sure of is that we need to make sure we're pursuing a strategy that both wipes out unfair trade standards by cheating countries like China and by other countries that have been treating America unfairly, while also selling boldly American goods abroad. For example, with farmers, you will hear farmers both be supportive of wiping out unfair trade standards, and you will hear agriculture groups saying, hey, we can't have too many retaliatory tariffs from other countries because that will make our goods more expensive abroad and it will drive sales down and wipe out farms. And the reality of how to deal with that is to get tough on unfair trade with a targeted trade strategy where we wipe out unfair trade standards and open up more markets by negotiating country by country. So rather than having these great big trade deals involving multiple countries across multiple types of agricultural products, for example, we work with one country on one product.
Brian, in your expert opinion, would these export controls by the Chinese regime affect the United States' military readiness?
That's a great question. And again, that depends upon the definition that they place on dual use, but it's something that we have to be absolutely ready for. And it's another example of why we need to have a unified front as far as what America's interests are, and another example of why we need to be as ready as possible, whether it's from a military standpoint or other standpoints, for whatever could come next.
Well, thank you so much for your input this morning. Brian Reisinger, author of Land Rich, Cash Poor. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate having me.
The U.S. is working to lift barriers on civil nuclear cooperation with India. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is visiting the country, saying defense collaboration is crucial for peace in the Indo-Pacific region. Something to note, Washington sees India as a key partner in countering China.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with senior Indian officials in New Delhi today. Sullivan also announced that the U.S. is finalizing steps to overcome hurdles for a civil nuclear partnership with Indian firms. Washington and New Delhi have also been negotiating the supply of nuclear reactors to energy-hungry India, a discussion that's been going since the mid-2000s. A key challenge has been aligning India's liability laws with global standards. The deal was initially signed by President George W. Bush in 2007. Here's Sullivan.
And as we see more and more new technologies diverted to unfriendly actors, the U.S. and India are going to have to ensure that valuable dual-use technologies don't fall into the wrong hands.
Sullivan also discussed a key issue on India's radar, an upcoming dam project that China plans to build in Tibet. India and Bangladesh are both concerned that the dam would affect the river further downstream, where millions of people rely on it. A U.S. official said Sullivan's delegation would not meet with the Dalai Lama during the visit. And at the same time, in Japan, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Tokyo on Monday. His discussions will focus on China's threat in the region and, quote, key efforts to promote a free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. China recently showcased what appears to be sixth-generation fighter jets. How advanced are these aircraft, and what impact could their development have on U.S. defense? We spoke to Rick Fisher, senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center, about how Washington could react. Rick Fisher, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Tiffany, thanks for having me back.
Now, videos have surfaced of China potentially surpassing the U.S. in terms of air power. This is with the development of two sixth-generation combat aircraft. Now, this did come out on December 26th, which is the birthday of Communist leader Mao Zedong. How likely is this propaganda? What is the likelihood that China has surpassed the U.S.?
Well, China definitely revealed on December 26th that it has developed two new, likely sixth-generation combat aircraft. China already has one fifth-generation combat aircraft in service, is developing a second, but that it would leap ahead to the sixth generation is quite disturbing for the balance of power in Asia and for the security of the United States and our Asian allies.
Now, by leaping ahead to the sixth generation, what does that offer that previous generations don't have?
Well, the Chinese have done some writing about this, and the designer of this new triangular-shaped aircraft from the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation published an article in early 2024 in which he described how a sixth-generation aircraft is different. Essentially, it's stealthier. It employs a much better airframe and engine integration, engines that are more stealthy. You can't detect them. Signatures are masked to a much greater degree, and the electronic capabilities are much greater. The ability to find targets, to communicate their location, and to coordinate with unmanned aircraft or other manned aircraft is much better.
And what do those features mean in terms of U.S. ability to detect them?
Well, what it means is that it's far more difficult for American radar, Japanese radar, and even optical systems to detect these aircraft. They have probably advanced stealth coatings. The integration of the engines with the airframes means that the signature is far more controlled, both in terms of the radar signature and the heat signature, so they can get closer before they launch an attack, and they can turn around and fly at supercruise speeds to evade counterattack.
Now, in terms of the U.S. side, you mentioned in a recent article that in 2010, then President Obama and his Secretary of Defense decided to terminate production of Lockheed Martin F-22A at 186 aircraft. How does that decision tie into the U.S. development of a potential sixth-generation fighter jet?
Well, the termination of the production of the F-22A is now so much more an astounding American strategic mistake. Mind you, we have to use about 120 F-22s that are flyable, combat coded, for global deterrence missions. China today may have 300 to 400 of its Chengdu J-20 fifth generation fighter. That's just overwhelming superiority. And whereas the United States has been flying a prototype of a sixth-generation fighter that we've not yet revealed since about 2020, we've not put it into production. And the decision to put that aircraft into production was delayed in the middle of 2024 by the Biden administration because they were concerned that the fighter cost too much. They wanted a new, less expensive design, which could take a couple of years to produce, and that's time that the United States simply doesn't have. This will allow the Chinese to put their two sixth-generation fighters into production, and they will likely be entering service before the American sixth-generation fighter can enter service. And that's a disaster, a strategic disaster for the United States and our ability to deter war on behalf of our allies.
Quite alarming indeed. Rick Fisher, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tiffany.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.